History has a strange kind of injustice. Some names become eternal. Others vanish as if they never existed. Museums are full. Walls are full of masterpieces. Yet history books often say only one sentence, painted by a man. But what if that's not the whole truth? What if women were there, not absent, but erased? Today we are opening a question that once sounded almost forbidden. How did women artists survive in the Renaissance and Baroque world? Because in that era, being a woman wasn't simply a life, it was a permission. A woman couldn't raise her voice. A woman couldn't walk freely alone. A woman couldn't enter academies the same way men did. And the most painful part? A woman wasn't expected to become an artist. Because to be an artist, you had to do something essential. Study the human body, learn anatomy, work for hours with living models. But for women, that was forbidden. So when a woman wanted to paint, people didn't just say, "You can't." They said, "You are not even allowed to see." Now imagine, in a world like that, two women rise, one in Italy, the very heart of the Renaissance, the other in the north, among wealthy merchants, cold cities, and silent power. And both look history in the eye and say, "I exist." Their names were Lavinia Fontana and Clara Peeters. But this is not just the story of two artists. This is the story of two different ways of fighting. Lavinia fights openly. She walks into noble houses. She paints the faces of the elite. She enters circles controlled by men and still demands respect. And then she does something almost shocking for a woman of her time. She paints what women were not supposed to paint. Mythology, powerful female figures, even nude scenes. In that world, it wasn't just art, it was courage. Because when a woman painted something forbidden, people didn't just judge the painting, they judged her, and that judgment could destroy lives. Now, Clara Peeters. Clara fights in silence. She doesn't enter palaces. She doesn't demand doors to open. She fights on a table. Bread, fish, cheese, a glass of wine, a shining knife. At first glance, you might think, it's just food. But no. Inside these paintings, there is wealth, trade, power, symbols of life and death. And the most genius part? Clara leaves behind a secret that still shocks people today. She hides her own face inside the reflection of silver cups. Yes, a tiny figure in polished metal, as if she is whispering to the future, "You forgot my name, but I'm still here." So now the question becomes, which of these women was truly more fearless? Which one changed history more? Lavinia, who conquered society through portraits and taboo art, or Clara, who wrote history in silence through symbols and reflections? Today we will put them face to face, but this is not women fighting women. This is a duel against history itself. And by the end of this video, you will understand something powerful. Sometimes the greatest battles in history are not fought with swords, but with a brush. There are people in history who don't just follow the rules of their time, they change them. And today we're talking about one of those rare figures, a woman who dared to paint in a world that didn't want her to exist. Her name was Lavinia Fontana. Now imagine this, the 1500s, Renaissance Italy, the golden age of art. The world remembers the giants, Michelangelo, Raphael, Titian. But there's a question no one asks. Where were the women? Could a woman even become an artist? In that era, being a woman wasn't simply difficult. It was a limitation written into society itself. Because to become a serious painter, you needed to do something essential. Study anatomy, understand the human body, work for hours with live models. But for women, that was forbidden. So when a woman said, "I want to become a painter," people didn't say, "It will be hard." They didn't say, "You probably can't." They said, "You are not allowed." And in that world, Lavinia Fontana was born. She came into the world in the city of Bologna around 1552. Was she lucky? Maybe. Because her father, Prospero Fontana, was a painter. That meant her classroom wasn't an academy. It was her own home. But Lavinia didn't become just a student. She became something far more dangerous, a professional. And this is where her story becomes unforgettable. Lavinia began painting portraits, not small portraits for family friends, but portraits of powerful people, noble families, scholars, wealthy patrons, even church officials. In Renaissance Italy, portrait painting wasn't just art, it was status, it was money, it was influence. And Lavinia didn't just enter that world, she succeeded inside it. Some historians even describe her as one of the first women in Europe to earn a real living from painting, not as a hobby, but as a career. But Lavinia didn't stop there, because what turned her into a legend wasn't only her skill, it was her courage. Most female artists of the time were expected to stay safe. Flowers, small devotional paintings, gentle subjects. But Lavinia entered forbidden territory. She painted mythology, classical gods and goddesses. And then came the most shocking move of all. She painted nude figures. Think about what that meant. In her era, painting nude bodies required study, models, and knowledge of anatomy. And society believed women should never even see those things. So when Lavinia painted them, it wasn't just artistic ambition, it was rebellion. It was her saying, a woman's hand can create greatness too. And that scared people, because Lavinia was proving something society didn't want to accept. Women were not only meant to be admired, they were meant to create. And what makes her story even more unbelievable is that she wasn't doing this alone in a quiet corner of life. She was married. Her husband was an artist named Gianpaolo Zappi. And here's the rare detail history almost never tells you. In some cases, her husband supported her work, helping with background details, workshop tasks, while Lavinia remained the main master. In a world dominated by men, she wasn't behind him. He was behind her, and on top of everything. Lavinia had children, a family, responsibilities, yet she still painted relentlessly. So when people talk about her success, it isn't just about talent, it's about endurance. It's about a woman who turned her life into a battlefield, and won with paint. As her fame grew, something incredible happened. She was invited to Rome, the greatest artistic stage in Europe. To succeed in Rome meant one thing: you would enter history, and Lavinia did. Today, she is remembered as one of Italy's first truly great female painters. And some go even further, calling her the first woman in Western Europe to build a real professional painting career. Not a hobby, not a side talent, a career. But here's the question. If Lavinia Fontana was this important, why don't more people know her name? Why is she missing from so many school books? Why is she still a hidden figure? Maybe the answer is simple. History doesn't only remember the greatest, it remembers the ones society allowed to be remembered. And Lavinia didn't ask permission. She took the brush. She stepped into a world that refused her, and she carved her own place into it. So every time we say her name today, we are doing more than remembering an artist. We're restoring a forgotten queen of art, Lavinia Fontana. History loves loud names, kings, generals, men with monuments. But sometimes, the most powerful stories in art history belong to someone who almost disappeared completely. A woman with no confirmed portrait, no famous letters, no clear biography, only paintings. And inside those paintings, she left a message so clever it survived for 400 years. Her name was Clara Peeters. Clara Peeters lived in the early 1600s during what we now call the Dutch Golden Age, a world of merchants, trade ships, wealth, and quiet power. This was not the dramatic Italy of Michelangelo. This was the North, cold light, sharp shadows, a world where money spoke louder than bloodlines. And in this world, painting was not just beauty, it was proof of status. But here's the strange thing. For a woman artist, the doors were still mostly closed. Art academies were dominated by men, guilds favored men, historical records favored men. So how did Clara survive? She didn't fight by painting kings. She fought by painting something even more dangerous: wealth itself. Clara Peeters became a master of still life, a genre most people underestimate. Food, silver, glass, knives, flowers. At first glance, you might think, it's just a table. But look again. Clara's paintings are not about food, they are about power. In the Dutch world, still life paintings were a visual language. Bread and cheese showed prosperity. Fish showed trade and survival. Silver cups showed luxury. Knives showed danger and control. And reflections showed the truth. Clara painted metal so real you can almost hear it. She painted glass so perfect you feel the cold surface. But her greatest weapon wasn't realism. It was her mind. Because Clara did something incredibly bold for her time, she signed her name on paintings, again and again. That sounds normal today. But in the 1600s, for a woman, that was a statement, a declaration. I exist. I am the artist. Yet Clara went even further. She knew that history had a habit of forgetting women, so she hid herself where no one could erase her. In the reflection of silver cups, Clara painted tiny self-portraits, small figures in polished metal, not loud, not obvious, but undeniable. It's one of the most brilliant hidden signatures in art history. Imagine that, a woman artist painting her own face inside a silver goblet, as if whispering to the future, "You can ignore my name, but you cannot erase my presence." And that's why Clara Peeters feels like a mystery today, because her life remains a shadow, but her paintings speak clearly. They tell us she was skilled, highly trained, confident, and respected enough that her works traveled far beyond the Netherlands. In fact, many historians believe her paintings were collected by wealthy patrons across Europe, proof that people wanted her art, even if they didn't want to remember her name. And then, she disappears. No confirmed death record, no final letter, no dramatic ending. She simply fades out of the documents. But her message stayed behind, in bread, silver, knives, and reflections. So when you look at a Clara Peeters still life today, you are not looking at a plate of food. You are looking at a silent battle. A woman placing her identity into the most reflective surfaces because she knew the world might try to forget her. And now, 400 years later, we say her name again, Clara Peeters. Not just a still life painter, a survivor, a strategist, a hidden queen of art. When people hear Lavinia Fontana and Clara Peeters, they imagine two completely different worlds. One, warm Renaissance Italy, portraits, nobles, churches. The other, cold Northern Europe, bread, silver, knives, reflections. But here's the truth history rarely tells. These two women were fighting the exact same war, just with different weapons. Because in their time, the greatest enemy wasn't lack of talent, it was society. A society that looked at a woman and decided her limits before she even spoke. And that's the first thing they shared. One, they existed in a world that didn't want them to exist. In the 1500s and 1600s, art wasn't only creative, it was political. It was controlled by academies, guilds, wealthy patrons, mostly men. So for a woman, being an artist wasn't a dream, it was a rebellion. Not because they painted something scandalous, but because they painted at all. Every brushstroke was a message. I'm here, I'm capable, I belong. And both Lavinia and Clara delivered that message. Two, both turned restriction into strategy. Most women didn't have access to formal training. They weren't welcomed into life drawing classes. They couldn't study anatomy freely. They had fewer chances to meet powerful patrons. So they did something genius. They turned limitation into advantage. Lavinia used what she could access: portraits, religious commissions, elite families, and she climbed the ladder from inside. Clara used what society underestimated, still life, and turned it into a battlefield of wealth, symbolism, and identity. They both proved something powerful. You don't need permission to be dangerous. Three, both mastered realism. Because realism was proof for them, beauty wasn't enough. Realism was evidence. Because in their era, people were waiting for women to fail. One weak painting and the world would say, "See, women can't do it." So their art became precise, almost unstoppable. Lavinia painted faces so alive they looked like they could speak. Fabric so real you could feel it. Clara painted silver so perfect it reflected the room. Glass so real it felt cold. They didn't paint pretty. they painted undeniable. 4. Both fought for one thing: professional respect. This is important. They didn't just want to paint, they wanted to be treated as serious artists. Lavinia built a professional career, paid commissions, elite clients, recognition. Clara signed her works and demanded authorship, again and again. In a world that tried to reduce women to muses, they became creators. They weren't someone's inspiration. They were someone's competition. 5. Both understood the power of identity. Lavinia's identity was loud. She placed women into history through portraits and mythological scenes. She painted women with intelligence and presence. Clara's identity was hidden, but fearless. She placed her own face into reflections, like a secret signature. Different methods, same message. I will not disappear. And here's the chilling part. Both of them knew their names could be erased, so they created art that made erasure impossible. 6. Both became victims of history after death. This is the last connection, and maybe the most tragic. They fought their way into the art world, and still history tried to silence them later. Men were placed in textbooks. Women were reduced to footnotes. Some of Clara's works were misattributed. Some of Lavinia's achievements were minimized. But now, centuries later, the world is finally correcting the record. And when we compare Lavinia Fontana and Clara Peeters, the real discovery isn't who was better. It's this: they were proof that talent was never the problem. The problem was permission. So if you ever ask, what do these two women have in common? The answer is simple. They both refused to vanish. And because of that, they became legends. So when people ask, who was greater, Lavinia Fontana or Clara Peeters? The real answer is, that question is too small, because they were never truly fighting each other. They were fighting something much bigger, a world that tried to keep women invisible. Lavinia fought in the open. She stepped into rooms filled with nobles and church power, painted faces that carried status, and dared to touch subjects women were never meant to touch. She didn't just paint portraits. She painted permission. She proved a woman could stand in the center of history, not as a muse, but as a master. And then there was Clara. Clara fought in silence. No grand stage, no royal spotlight, just a wooden table. Bread, silver, glass, and a mind sharp enough to turn still life into a declaration of existence. She signed her name. She hid her face inside reflections, not because she wanted attention, but because she understood something terrifying. History forgets women, and she refused to be forgotten. That's what connects them. Not their style, not their country, not their subject, but their message. I will not vanish. So maybe the real winner is not Lavinia or Clara. Maybe the real winner is every woman who came after them, every artist who refused to be reduced to silence. Because the truth is, these two women didn't just paint the world around them, they changed the world that tried to erase them. And the next time you walk into a museum, don't just read the label, look closer. Ask yourself, who created this? And who was denied a name? Because hidden inside frames, inside brushstrokes, inside silver reflections, there are voices still fighting to be heard. If you want more forgotten legends like Lavinia Fontana and Clara Peeters, subscribe now. Because the next story will prove once again, the greatest battles in history were not always fought with swords. Sometimes they were fought with a brush.